Open the meeting for council meeting for Tuesday, August 21st, here at 6 p.m. And I would like to I'm calling to order. And could I have a pledge of allegiance? We do a, sorry. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so I don't have a little cheat sheet, and I think I'd like to, could I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Edwards.
Here.
Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Councilmember Hunley.
Here.
And the record can show Vice Mayor Harrington is not present. Mayor Agramonte.
Here.
Thank you.
And Council, I just wanted, Vice Mayor Harrington let me know that she was going to be unable to attend and for the council to please proceed.
So it looks like we have a short agenda, so hopefully we'll get through it. I'll beat my normal 10 o'clock time or 9:30 time. I'm sure everybody will appreciate that. Okay, so let me see.
Madam Mayor, would you like me to announce the item?
Pardon?
Would you like me to announce
Yes,
the item?
thank you.
Item 3.1, hear and accept impact report, Elections Code, Section 9212, regarding an initiative measure to permit personal cannabis cultivation and commercial cannabis businesses within the city of Sonoma.
Oh, thank you. I have nothing. I'm turning to the city
Great.
manager.
Mayor Agramonte, council members, members of the public. So we are here today to hear an impact report. And let me give you a little background. As council knows, back in April, the city clerk was served with a notice of intent to circulate a petition by Mr. Early. And as required, the city attorney did both a ballot title and summary, which was returned in later April to Mr. Early. And then Mr. Early basically submitted his canvas petition collected his signatures, which were then turned in on June 6th, and after review by the city clerk and the Sonoma County Registers of Voters, it was found to be sufficient on June 25th. So at this point, it was delivered on June 25th, but certified on July 18th. So at the July 23rd council meeting, the council had three mandatory options in front of it. One, to adopt the measure without any alteration and put it on the ballot, which would have been the November 2018 ballot, to submit the measure, to adopt it as our own ordinance, to submit it, put it on the November 2018 election order report on the impacts of the measure if the community were to pass the measure. And there are a number of impacts that are outlined in the state government code that are listed in the staff reports: fiscal, land use, impacts on traffic, other city services, etc. And then council members also added a few items that they wanted to look at. So the city was given 30 days to prepare that report and return it to the city council, and that is the purpose of tonight. And in the interim, we moved forward, and I talked to a number of different firms and hired two firms. One was HDL, and HDL has an expertise looking both on sales transactions, different financial use, and in cannabis. And so we were pleased to have Martin Lovelace on my far right, who is here and was part of the author of this project. In addition, we also hired a law firm, Jarvis, Fay and Gibson, and the reason we needed to hire a separate legal firm was to look at the kind of legal issues, how the initiative was written. Our own city attorney, Mr. Walter, will need, at the point that this actually goes on a ballot, to write an impartial analysis, and so it was not appropriate for him to be involved in the legal review and the drafting of the report. And so Christy Crowley is here with me, and she did the legal review and drafted part of, again, the other part of the report that's in front of you. So the total cost of the project, the HDL contract ended up to about $15,000, and the legal contract will be somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000. So we're estimating about $27,000 total for the work that was done in the 30 days in preparing the impact report. So with that, I'd like to turn it, I think, first to Ms. Crowley, who will go through and provide an overview, and then we'll hear from Mr. Lovelace.
Thank you so much, Kathy. My name is Christy Kroll. I'm with Jarvis Bay and Gibson, and like Kathy said, the city retained our firm to assist HDL in compiling this impact report for you for the purposes of discerning impacts pertaining to the initiative that was brought to your council about 30 days ago. So I just want to take you through the land use impact section, and then Mark here to my right will go over the remaining categories, but we thought it would be good to start with the land use section because the land use impacts sort of inform the rest of the impacts. So Mark will kind of take over when we get to the fiscal impact section. But just as a general land use impact takeaway, I wanted to start by indicating that the initiative allows commercial cannabis businesses throughout the entire commercial zone with no discretionary review by the city. We interpret the initiative to only require a ministerial zoning clearance. There are passing references to permit revocation or modification in the initiative, but no other indication that any such permit is actually required or that any city discretionary body such as your esteemed council or the planning commission or any other discretionary body would issue any such permit. So we just wanted to highlight that as kind of the background information upon which you should read the rest of the report and inform the rest of your opinions about the initiative. This is not the approach that's taken by most local jurisdictions. Most local jurisdictions allow a competitive application process, discretionary permit review and approval, development agreements, or some combination thereof. And that's not the approach that this initiative has taken. So with that kind of background, I'm going to go over just a couple of the categories and then turn it over to Mark. The first impact category we looked at what pertains to the sensitive use buffers that the initiative identifies. The initiative identifies 4 sensitive uses: schools, city parks, the library, and the plaza. State law, on the other hand, identifies a 600-foot buffer for 3 sensitive uses: schools, daycare centers, and youth centers, and allows a local jurisdiction to specify either greater or less setbacks than that 600-foot requirement, but it doesn't specifically allow removal of a sensitive use entirely, which is what the initiative appears to propose here. We just wanted to highlight that issue. It's entirely possible that state law will at some point be interpreted to allow reduction of the setback to 0, so it would allow elimination of a sensitive use in that way, but right now there's no guidance on that. We have no case law or any kind of precedent to run with in terms of that interpretation of state law. So we want to identify the fact that to the extent that the initiative proposes reducing a setback to 0 or in essence eliminating a sensitive use of a school, it may be inconsistent with state law. We also want to note that other cannabis businesses aren't included as sensitive uses. A lot of other local jurisdictions have done that to ensure that cannabis businesses can't cluster. So this initiative would actually allow clustering of cannabis businesses. That said, some jurisdictions have decided that that is the preferred method for allowing cannabis businesses to exist. But again, the initiative has, allowed that outright. So the local control for this council to determine whether clustering was appropriate for the city of Sonoma is no longer an option for you. This initiative would simply allow clustering outright. And finally, in terms of sensitive use buffers, multiple cannabis uses are allowed at a single location. So all the types of commercial uses that are listed in the initiative are allowed in any single location. That would be manufacturing, testing and laboratory uses, retail uses, all allowed at one location. So we just wanted to note that for you as well. In terms of the number and location of businesses, again, all commercial cannabis businesses are allowed throughout the whole commercial district, and HGL in combination with city staff worked to provide you with the list of 33 parcels on page 32 of the appendix. Those 33 parcels are the parcels that city staff's MAP program has identified would allow or would be outside the proposed buffer zones for the initiative and within the commercial zoning district. So those would be the locations where cannabis businesses would be allowed. This section of the report also refers to, leasing issues and rents and stuff, and Mark can address that, or if you have questions for him about that, he can get into that next. But the takeaway, I think, from that section of the report is that the initiative allows all types of commercial cannabis businesses anywhere in the commercial zone except within those buffer areas. So those are the 33 identified parcels for you. Moving on to on-site consumption, the initiative appears to allow or at least contemplate on-site consumption at commercial businesses and appears to require a use permit for a special event that would allow on-site consumption. But again, the initiative isn't clear in terms of its regulations of both on-site consumption and special events. Again, there's no discretionary permit or approval required for the business to operate regularly. So it's interesting that a use permit would be required for a special event and not a temporary use permit. A use permit, like your normal city process would issue to run with the land. So that is something that we wanted to highlight for you, would be a potential issue that might come up if the initiative is adopted eventually. And we do believe that smoking cannabis would still be regulated by the city zoning ordinance. Your chapter 7-24 appears to prohibit smoking outside, even on a private commercial property. And so if the initiative intends to allow that, it may be in conflict with your zoning ordinance in that circumstance. And just that's a good segue into our other consistency impact discussions. First, general plan consistency. There's some conflict with the general plan in that the general plan does not allow heavy manufacturing in the commercial district. It's possible that some cannabis manufacturing uses might be considered heavy manufacturing. We just don't know without having had time to look into that further. Also without kind of comparing them. What we did was we compared them to what you currently have in your manufacturing zone, and you can see there's a footnote on that page in the report that I think lists about 6 or 8 manufacturing uses, furniture manufacturing, recycling facilities, that kind of thing. We also wanted to highlight that all of those uses require a conditional use permit. So cannabis manufacturing would be the only manufacturing use in the commercial zone that did not require a conditional use permit. It would just require the zoning clearance that the initiative allows it to have. In terms of consistency with the zoning ordinance, there's a few inconsistencies that the report highlights for you. One is parking. I actually think the initiative requires one more parking spot per manufacturing, for the manufacturing use only. It's generally consistent, but there is a little parking requirement inconsistency. There's also some internal inconsistencies in the initiative in terms of the proposed amendments to the zoning table and amendments to and the initiative text itself. So if you look at the proposed amendments to Table 2-1, they fail to reference medical cannabis. And so those inconsistencies are highlighted in that zoning consistency section of the report. In terms of the self-certification process, we wanted to highlight the fact that the initiative provides for this process for businesses that have operated prior to September 1st, 2016, consistent with the Compassionate Use Act. And basically it allows these businesses to, quote, self-certify, and that self-certification process requires an application, some kind of unspecified fee to go to the city, and then an annual monitoring period that isn't clearly specified, but it basically looks like that would be the time period during which the city could determine if the business had complied with state law prior to September 1st, 2016. It's unclear whether the business would have to also comply with laws passed since that September date in 2016, but so there is this self-certification process for those businesses that have been in existence before and that could comply with the self-certification process laid out in the initiative, for them to come to the city and obtain this self-certification instead of a zoning clearance, whether that would be more onerous or less onerous for a business owner. It's hard to say, given the fact that a zoning clearance is a ministerial approval by the planning department. But we just wanted to let you know that the self-certification process would allow a local business that had already been operating inconsistent with the city's local rules to come back to the city and self-certify through this process. And finally, the last thing I want to note in terms of land use, potential land use impacts and potential land use issues that our firm noted was that the initiative does not expressly prohibit outdoor cultivation. Our firm and staff believes that the initiative is intended to prohibit outdoor cultivation. At the beginning of the initiative, it indicates that it's a permissive ordinance, so anything that's not expressly permitted is considered banned. So since outdoor cultivation isn't expressly permitted, we believe that the intent is to ban outdoor cultivation. Also, a lot of the regulations that do exist in the initiative point to indoor cultivation, like security for enclosures and that kind of thing. So it looks like the initiative intends to prohibit outdoor cultivation. That said, we wanted to highlight that there is some ambiguity. There's reference to outdoor lighting and a couple other instances like that where we wanted to note that, the initiative could be open to interpretation, but we wanted to indicate that it is our belief that it's intended to prohibit outdoor cultivation consistent with your current regulations, I believe. If Mark wants to kind of take over and head into the fiscal analysis, then sure. Yeah.
There we go. I'm Mark Lovelace with HDL, and just by way of background, just to let you know, I served 8 years on the Board of Supervisors in Humboldt County, so we've had a little bit of familiarity with this issue. Going back, you might have heard our name in the paper occasionally. I was tasked with providing a market analysis to aid in this research because the initiative does one thing. The initiative allows certain uses and in certain places. As noted, it doesn't provide a lot of limitations on that, and it certainly doesn't provide the city with any discretion in determining what are or are not appropriate locations for these uses. However, regulations are only one of a number of forces that affect where businesses choose to locate, and the market forces are going to be a huge piece of that. So providing the market analysis combined with the land use analysis and legal analysis gives us a better sense of what might actually happen with the interplay of these different forces. As noted, the initiative doesn't limit the number, type, or size of cannabis businesses that could be allowed in the city. But from our analysis, we don't think that this means that the city is going to be overrun, nor that the commercial zones are going to be overrun with these businesses. We think that the biggest constraint that they're going to encounter is the availability and affordability of appropriate spaces. The city also doesn't propose any sort of a tax on cannabis businesses, but it also doesn't prohibit the city from separately or in tandem with this initiative putting a separate measure before the voters for that purpose. So to determine what we think the city may be able to realize in terms of some annual revenues, were the city to do that, we took tax rates from generalized from 25 different tax measures that HDL has been working with other communities around the state on, and applied those to the market assumptions that we have for the different types of cannabis businesses. Overall, we think our most likely projection for revenues under the initiative is that the city may be able to generate between $164,000 and $328,000 in annual revenues from some combination of one or two retailers and one or two probably small boutique type manufacturers. The other business types we just don't think are a good fit from the business's perspective. So we think that they would be more likely to look at locations that are outside of the city within the county. The county already has gone through a process of determining appropriate zoning and where these businesses would be allowed. And we think that due to property values, lease rates, and just the appropriateness of the spaces themselves, we think that that would be more attractive to most of these businesses. Having said that, though, as noted, this initiative doesn't provide the city any discretion in determining where they may locate. So if a manufacturing business determined that it wanted to adapt what's currently an office space within a commercial zone, that would be allowable under this. Or a cultivation space. Again, we think that there's more likely better locations for that. But if a business chose that they wanted to do this, this takes away the city's ability to have any discretion in the matter, to put any conditions upon that, or to look at the impacts and determine how they can best be dealt with, or even to provide appropriate fees for addressing those impacts, because all you're left with is the ability to do, as noted, the simple zoning clearance. The retailers, we assume that the city would be grouped with the surrounding communities. We see an overall total population of around 25,000 people in the city and the surrounding area up to approximately Glen Ellen. People tend to not want to drive great distances for these types of purchases, and so that's what we think the customer base would be, and that's where we get to the determination of perhaps one or two. If a retailer were to locate in the unincorporated area outside of the city, that would take away from the market for retailers within the city. There's kind of a maximum that any population base can absorb, and at some point they'll just start cannibalizing each other's sales. Manufacturers, again, we think perhaps one or two small boutique type manufacturers, each of which with assuming 2 million gross receipts and a tax rate of 2%, which is fairly common, around 40,000 in revenue for the city from each of those. Distributors and testing laboratories. Testing laboratories tend to locate places where there's kind of a certain critical mass of cannabis businesses, and without having that, even though there is certainly a lot of cannabis businesses in Sonoma County as a whole, we don't see a real focus within this area, and We just don't see a market-based reason why they would choose to locate within the city. Distributors kind of follow in the same mold with that. We think that they would be, again, looking for more appropriate light industrial type spaces, which aren't really available within the zoning allowed by this. Cultivation, because cultivation has a long history of happening surreptitiously in spaces that are not appropriate for it, such as people's homes, people's garages, things of this sort. It is possible that someone may wish to adapt some spaces for what would almost certainly be small indoor cultivation, no more than 10,000 square feet. It's possible to do larger, but looking at the spaces that are available, we just don't think that's very likely. If that were the case, the city could potentially see some additional revenues, taxing those up to approximately $140,000 a year from cultivation businesses. But again, we just think that that's possible but an unlikely fit. Looking at some of the other potential impacts from this, one of the biggest impacts is the loss of local control. And that's a difficult one to quantify. But taking away the city's ability to have a voice in determining where would or wouldn't be appropriate to locate each distinct business, lumping all cannabis businesses in together, it's kind of like locating a winery and a liquor store into the same category. These are very, very different operations. And so it takes away a lot of that discretion, and it also takes away the ability for the city to appropriately assign costs for some of the externalized responsibilities of regulating these businesses. HDL, and working with a lot of other clients, when a city has the ability to set its own regulatory program and charge appropriate fees, they can also set up monitoring and enforcement programs so that over the course of the first year and successive years, you have the ability to know that you're going to have this many times a year that you're going to be inspecting the site, making sure that they're following all of the rules, to be able to do compliance audits or do annual financial audit to make sure that since it's a cash-heavy industry, that that the cash is being handled correctly and that the taxes are being paid appropriately. Those things, typically a program like that might cost $15,000 a year for ongoing compliance, plus $5,000 or $6,000 a year in initial application review. But again, those are costs that are denied the city. So your choice would be either to not do these kinds of things, in which case you externalize the impacts onto the public, or to do these kinds of monitoring and enforcement, but on the city's dime, in which case you would externalize the costs onto the public. Infrastructure costs that we've looked at, generally we think most of these businesses don't carry infrastructure impacts that are outside of what are considered by some of the other similar uses that may happen. However, that's generalizing across all of the commercial zone. As we start looking at these spaces more distinctly, you start looking at the fact that you have commercial zone that can cover a number of different potential uses, from office space to retail to some light industrial type uses. And should you have each of these would typically carry a different obligation in terms of parking and traffic and how you mitigate those things. Office spaces have a much smaller amount of foot traffic through the day. If you had a retailer, particularly a large one, locating in an office space or a complex of office spaces, that would probably carry a very localized traffic impact in terms of the amount of traffic going in and out of that space. Regular retail is actually comparable in terms of what they do actually have a parking requirement within this, and that would be comparable to what's required with the current retail, but because you could squeeze that use into what wasn't previously a retail space, you might see some pretty localized traffic impacts or parking impacts. See, I think that pretty much runs through most of the impacts I was going to discuss here. Oh, the lease rates, that's another one that I did want to talk about. The impact upon some of the things that the city doesn't have the ability to otherwise regulate. There has been in any number of cities or other communities land use speculation when you have a limited number of properties that allow this use, that landowners can think that they can charge whatever they want for these spaces. We think that because of the difference in property values between within the city, both from the plaza to West Napa and up to Sonoma Highway, there's already quite a bit of variation in property values there. And then once you get outside of the city limit, those property values go down even further. So we don't, from our analysis, we don't believe that the market would reward that kind of property speculation. However, nothing's going to prevent people from trying it. And we have seen places where there's been an increase of 2, 3, or even 4 times what might pre-exist in terms of those property values. So in the near term, there could definitely be an impact from that kind of speculation. As noted, we don't think that the market would ultimately reward it over time. So with that, I think that goes through most of my points here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah.
So, so thinking about, so let's say a dispensary, and maybe you have an example from another community. So if somebody wants to have a daycare center, let's say a business opens up in town that they're bringing a lot of young families into town, and somebody wants to open up a daycare center, but if, let's say we have a dispensary somewhere in Sonoma, would it preclude somebody from opening a daycare center because they happen to own a piece of property within 1,000 feet or 600 feet of a dispensary? So are we turning around and prohibiting daycare, or if somebody wants to open a Montessori school, or I'm just curious.
It doesn't limit successive uses. It's just that if the daycare chooses to move into that space, they can't then say, well, so that cannabis business now has to move. They move in fully
Right.
aware that the cannabis business is there, and they're allowed to. But it doesn't. The cannabis business has first right of having moved there before that business existed.
Thank you.
So I do have a question. I was looking at you were discussing just inspections. So I guess I got lost in there. Are you talking about dispensaries, manufacturing, and laboratories, or within their own category? Who are they inspecting? Is it the cultivation? What else? What are we talking about when you're talking about inspection?
Any or all of those. These kinds of ongoing compliance programs are up to the city or the county's discretion to determine what they think they want to monitor and inspect for. In places like Humboldt, of course, it's all about cultivation, and so that's 99% of all of the work. In places like Los Angeles and places in Southern California, there's a lot more retail activity, but there's also some pieces though that are common threads for all of them. Again, it's a cash-rich business at this point, and the fiscal or financial audits are a lot of communities have found that that's really necessary for making sure that all of the taxes are being reported appropriately, and that money isn't the cash isn't just kind of not showing up on the books. So that becomes a critical piece for any or all of them. What you would inspect for any one business type it would of course vary a little bit from retailers to cultivators to manufacturers.
Well, it certainly makes sense. It's a business, so obviously there have to be some standards. Since you mentioned the word cash, what's, I mean, I've heard a lot of different things regarding cash, just because of the bank's regulations. So I know that there are pass-throughs that they use, to get around that. I mean, not they. I understand there are pass-throughs for cash to be able to put it somewhere where people do accept it. I don't know if those are credit unions. I don't really understand that. Is there a way that you could?
There was a bill in the legislature this year. I can't recall the number that just yesterday heard had been put on the suspense file, so it's not going to move forward this year. And that would have tried to address some of these cash handling issues. There are a number of tools lacking the ability for the businesses to use traditional banks. There are a number of tools that various jurisdictions have set up to handle the cash, such as saying, if you're going to be bringing in anything more than $1,000 cash at any one time, you need an appointment, and we only do appointments for those on Fridays, and when we can make sure that there's a little extra security on hand, things of that sort. So there's ways to be able from the public side of it, of the agencies that have to be able to accept some of this money to be able to manage it. But it still doesn't get at the core issue that their profits are, the money itself is going to be in cash, and that also always raises risks about being able to track it all.
So what are the different, I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but what are the different methods of the pass-throughs and, just perhaps of 2 or 3 methods?
I probably wouldn't be the best person from HDL to speak to that.
Okay.
I do a lot more of the upfront work rather than the nitty-gritty, working with the actual applicants and the, or businesses in the inspection and enforcement end of things. But my colleague Matt Eaton actually was in the enforcement division in Colorado for many, many years and has a tremendous amount of experience there and here in California in that aspect of things.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have that information, but it does go on. I mean, there are different things, different ways to be able to get cash to flow certain places. Okay, thank you.
One quick follow-up question. So I'm on Weed Maps right now, and I don't know if in your numbers that we've included, I see there's 3 locations, like within a mile of Sonoma or 2 miles. Are those in your numbers as well?
Yeah, we did look at that. That becomes one of the things that gives us some suggestion of what's the demand currently within the area, and for a service or consumer population of 25,000, as we noted, typically we would expect to see a lot more than that. One of the things that kind of intuitively we see is places that have a lot of historical cultivation, such as Humboldt, Mendocino, Sonoma, that people have much more of a history of just getting stuff from friends or whatever. There's more of a kind of an existing underground network that's not, not the new emergent one that we see with Weed Maps, but Southern California, community of 25,000, you might see 6 to 10 businesses serving that. So that suggests that because there's so much cultivation in this area, you might have a lot of a lot of use that's never going to make it into any cash transactions, whether legal or illegal.
And what do you see as the future of with the bigger players? So tobacco companies are investing millions of dollars into the industry, and delivery companies and delivery mechanisms. Do you see that in your work? Do you see that as a threat to the local trade?
In a very general sense, with my familiarity with the industry from Humboldt County, where we have depending on whose figures you want to believe, anywhere from 10 to 15,000 different grows. Not the same as growers. Many have multiple operations, but a tremendous number of people, thousands, many thousands that have been deriving all or some of their income from this industry. And historically, we've had a lot of people that were the back to the landers, that originally started this industry back in the 70s, and there's been perhaps a desire to see people be able to transition into this new, this brave new world that we're entering. Unfortunately, people who have lived, 30 years off the grid, an entirely cash economy, and probably don't even have bank accounts under their names, on unpermitted parcels with houses that don't have building permits or whatever, they don't have a lot of experience interfacing with regulations and with government, and it's proven to be a very, very difficult hurdle for a lot of these people to transition into the new legal industry. Instead, what we see are people that are getting into this industry anew that don't have any background with it, but they know how to start a business, they know how to do permits, how to do development, and they know how to apply an existing business skill set to this industry, and all they need to do is hire someone that actually knows how to grow cannabis. And a lot of those businesses are having a much easier time making it through the regulatory process. So I think that that again becomes something where we hear in Humboldt a lot of concern from the industry about how regulations and taxes are crushing the little guys, and unfortunately, from my perspective, while that is absolutely a piece of the overall picture, what's really killing them is just exposure to the free market, and that's something that they just don't have experience with from the past.
Thank you.
Take it out to the public.
Ken Brown, 1396 Lubeck Street here in Sonoma. Just some observations. Outdoor grows are basically good. Indoor grows are arduous for patients and the environment. I did not sign Mr. Early's ballot measure. I guess maybe I was a councilman for too long, and just like to be a free citizen. But local control is important. And I've heard all of you speak to local control as an important part of your program. Don't lose sight of that local control. Sonoma needs a dispensary. We need the money. And if you're interested, Thursday at Sonoma Grill, Sonoma Valley Cannabis Enthusiasts, which I am now the president of, is having a meeting at 3 o'clock. Come down and check it out. You might learn something new. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Oh, make sure this works. Josette Brosiker, 1110 Loma Court. I'm hoping that today we can kind of start over on thinking about medical cannabis dispensary in the city. We have an opportunity to do the right thing. It really doesn't matter that this ballot initiative is kicked down the road until 2020. Everything in the report points to it not being right for Sonoma. I think many signers were just frustrated and wanted to put it to a vote. This is a chance for the city council to put something carefully crafted together. And this and any other self-serving ballot measure will not be needed or wanted by Sonoma City voters. The last time I heard, I spoke that, well, we can just get delivery from sources out of town. I checked several out, and yes, they can deliver what I want, but at 2 or 3 times the cost of the dispensary in Cotati. That makes sense, they have to pay for their overhead, but it does not make it a good or viable alternative to having a dispensary in the city. Many people say, who cares if the city does this or not? Something will open up in the Springs. Well, I hate to say it, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. I have participated in other issues concerning the Springs at the county level, and this one is going to be driven by forces that are not going to allow for a dispensary to go in anywhere in the valley anytime soon. The city of Sonoma has the power to make it happen without all the complicated stuff that goes on in District 1 in the county. And no matter what's been said in past meetings, there's no loitering or underage use at the Cotati dispensary. I've been there many times on different days of the week and different times, and I've never seen this. A well-done dispensary with strict regulations can work here in Sonoma. Sonoma has a unique chance to be the master of its own destiny on this issue and not allow someone with a self-serving or money-making ideas to fashion policy now and in the future. That's all I had prepared, but quickly I want to say that the weed maps, there is a distinction between delivery and a location. There are no places in 1 or 2 miles of us. Those are simply that they can deliver here. And that's how that thing works. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Georgia Kelly on Mitchell Way in Sonoma. And I just wanted to repeat some of what Josette just said. I think the petition, as it was stated, really is not relevant for our community. There's enough things wrong with it that I would like to see the council start over with it. And I would like to propose that we have medical marijuana dispensary in town, but no recreational. That would be my viewpoint. I think we need a medical dispensary in the town. I think there are enough people here that want it, that use it, that need it. As for recreational, I think I disagree with the lawyer here who said that the marijuana industry wouldn't take over the space in Sonoma. We have the wine industry to point to and say, well, yes, they do take over. Once they get a foothold, we now have, 35 wine tasting bars and rooms around the plaza. So I don't think that this would just start with 1 or 2. I think it would become a big business in the community if it were allowed in the recreational sphere. So I would recommend it goes back to the council to craft a petition that works for the community and maybe get more information from the community as what people really want here. I don't think it was clear from that petition that was, I agree with Josette, was very self-serving and didn't represent a lot of the community. So I hope the council, I like the fact that you did have this study done. I think it's been very edifying for all of us to hear the details of what was left out in the rush to try and get that petition passed through to be voted on in November. I'm glad it won't be. And I think we have this opportunity, you have the opportunity, and all of us in the community to create something that works for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Peter, King of Masterpiece Theater. I am that I am as I'm here, speaking truth to power, free of all fear. And I am the
Peter,
government.
could I have your last name, please?
Cherneff.
Pardon?
Cherneff.
Okay. Thanks.
And I am the government, which is what I learned in junior high school. And then government servants, there's not supposed to be any government servants that have titles of nobility, such as esquires, from the White House down to City Council. So I hear the word comply. So to comply or not to comply, I say American veterans semper fi. Time for America to comply with the U.S. Constitution. Time for Americans to bless Creator Almighty. And with respect to Aretha Franklin, it's time we do more than just think. You know, under the U.S. Constitution, this would never even be an issue. But we're under martial law, and the world's a war zone, worst ever I saw. And in support and assisting to facilitate Master Bong's Tommy Chong's Sweet Medicinal Bank of California. It's what the growers want, and I warn you, it be including the absence of usury, commercials, and lawyers at the bar. Tommy says we'll take care of all your insurance needs for our customers be the superstar. Even Julian Assange of WikiLeaks fame showed us this be all orchestrated by the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, Big Pharma, and Bar Association, they have stolen the game. And Jesuit lawyer and his band of thieves, that lawyer being Jerry Brown, have garnered 60% of every dollar, destroying many a thriving town. Where would be American courage and ingenuity when it comes to extinguishing insanity? The California law enforcement is hardly the problem. There's only 90,000 on the force. Bar lawyers be 320,000 strong, an additional 80 per year, time we get aboard the almighty horse. So WikiLeaks most recently published that there has been no noteworthy boycotts or strikes on American soil, not against corruption or war, nor oil since 1970, yet this Sunday's strike will attain as we like. We are all more than weary. The homeless and war widows are teary. California UC students pay for the U.S. and Israeli military with 40% of their tuition. I am that I am as I'm here, speaking truth to power, to loudly requisition for Americans to step to the plate. Fulfilling our fate as destiny's date, we be the most powerful on the planet, and this 40-day freedom strike has us standing upon granite. United we engage and take the stage with a lot of love and a little bit of rage. We're going to turn this page. This 40-day strike, listening to Purple Haze, no labor, no schools, everyone off the fence, no mortgages, no rents. And we're going to meet on the 26th of the full moon. It's our high noon, a beautiful tune, on the Oakland port for a meet and greet, a walk and talk for those that are in support of America the way it's supposed to be, its promise, and including all seed sowers, wheat growers.
Excuse me, sir, your time is up, so I'm sorry you'll have to stop.
And let's see, one last thing if I may, since there's no one behind me.
Well, there is.
Oh, there is?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, we're going to shut down the Fed and the IRS as well. We're going to weld this cracked Liberty Bell. I say it, you hear it, so be it. It is so.
Thank you.
David Eicher, Loma Court, and I've got weed maps up on my phone right now, and the 3 within Sonoma are delivery only. There are no storefronts. Closest storefront is Cotati, according to this. Outdoor cultivation. I believe there was said that since it was not mentioned in the initiative, outdoor cultivation, that is probably means that it's not allowed. However, I recall also initiatives that says the city council can change it as long as it's more permissive and allows more use of cannabis. So doesn't that mean that the city would be able to allow outdoor cannabis use on its own by passing, not necessarily a vote of the citizens, but the city council itself can pass and allow outdoor use of marijuana. So I believe it does, but that's a question for someone that knows more than I on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eicher.
Hi, Regina Baker, First Street West. I don't know about anyone else here, but in the last 20-some years that I've lived here, I certainly have traveled to the doctors in Marin, Santa Rosa, and different places. So I think traveling to get your medicine is not a really big deal. But that's not what I came here to say. I don't quite understand how the tax is going to go back to the city because there's no sales tax for medical marijuana ID holders. So if the cannabis club owner, in the future, is going to give the city tax, is that going to be considered a pay-to-play violation? And I do know that cannabis owners of clubs have to pay an excise tax, but that doesn't go, that goes to the government. That doesn't go to the city. So can somebody explain how the sales tax is going to get to the city?
So we do have people who will answer that question, but that's after, of course, you've asked it and they're prepared to answer it.
Excellent. That's what I want to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any others who would like to speak? Here, seeing no one rise and approach the podium, I will close the public session. And I think our city manager, and perhaps you have heard some of our questions.
So I had heard two questions. First, I'll ask Christine to speak to the question of since the initiative does allow editing or amendments in the future, there's some language there, and could that allow for clarification about outdoor cannabis?
Sure. So Section 7 of the initiative governs amendment of the initiative, and it states that any amendment of the initiative has to be consistent with and further the purpose of the initiative. It also says that any amendment to the initiative to expand the rights conferred in the initiative is going to be deemed consistent. So I think that without we would have to, the city attorney's office would have to confirm and examine further, but it appears on its face that any expansion of rights would be allowed. That said, we would have to make sure that the outdoor cultivation would be consistent with the rest of the ordinance. If it was explicitly if the initiative's intent is determined to explicitly prohibit outdoor cultivation, that could actually be inconsistent with the terms of the initiative. So that's something, the city attorney's office would have to look into to ensure that any such amendment allowing outdoor cultivation would be consistent with the rest of the initiative. So I know that's, kind of your attorney dual answer for you that you're not looking for. Yeah, I'm sorry. But I mean, just on its face, the initiative doesn't provide the enough information for us to determine, at the outset that yes, you could do that. That would have to be, something that the council wanted to do and wanted the city attorney's office to make a full determination on.
So are you suggesting it has to relate then in some way? It has to relate, if there's an amendment, has to relate to the
An amendment has
initiative?
to be, any amendment has to be consistent with and further the purposes of the initiative. And also, yeah, Mark points out, any voter would, could challenge the city's determination that, because this is a voter-approved, or it would be a voter-approved initiative. Any voter could challenge the city's determination that, we're determining that cultivation is consistent, so we're going to expand and amend the initiative to allow for outdoor cultivation. Any voter could challenge that determination. So like I said, it's something the city attorney's office would have to look into at the council's direction and determine whether an amendment would be consistent or not.
Is there something you wanted to add, or no?
Just that one point, that it's the kind of thing that, despite the city's best efforts to determine what is or isn't consistent, it could be challenged and might very well end up being determined in courts.
So I think there were a couple other questions, so I won't.
Yeah, the last question that I gathered was really kind of just to try to understand sales tax.
Yeah, and that is a point of some confusion because the state laws do protect medical sales from sales tax. However, they're very, very tightly defined. It's medical sales to a person with a state-issued medical marijuana identification card. That only in those sales, and that's not just someone who has a physician's recommendation or is a member of of a cooperative or something of that sort. It has to be people with that card. Statewide, there's only 6,172 people who've bothered to get that state-issued card. It's actually a state card issued by the county public health departments. And in the report, it has the number for, I think it was around 163 of those cards in all of Sonoma County, not very many. But that also, it's only on the actual sales tax. All of the other taxes that are applied are excise taxes, and the law makes a very specific allowance for local governments to be able to also attach an excise tax, which is on the easier to consider it as a tax on the privilege of being able to have a commercial cannabis business. So it's not on the actual sale, it's on allowing you to have the business.
Okay, yeah.
So a quick follow-up on that. So in the what I've read in the journal and other things, the revenue that's coming back to the state, it's not meeting the expectations of. And you probably have a better number
Yeah,
than...
certainly not in the first year. I think the revenues were running about half of what had been anticipated. There were a number of things that were happening in terms of just the getting the product into the flow, into the supply chain. There was a lot of product initially that had not been created because the regulations applied as of January 1st, 2016, 17, and there was a lot of product that had not been created pursuant to those regulations, but they allowed that product to stay within the market so that everyone can keep going. And then there was a delay of when that product was no longer allowed, and now it had to all be product that's been created pursuant to the system. And so there have been a number of things that just have kind of held that end of things, along with just the rate of getting businesses licensed. And one of the things that was a real kind of a tight point on it was the low number of testing laboratories that were being permitted. There were only, I think by our most recent count, only 28 of them statewide. And that's not nearly enough to be able to do the required testing of all cannabis and cannabis products.
And I think that's, I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. No, thank you.
And I think that really is the purpose of a lab, to be able to check the levels of these two, the elements within that. And are they regulated? They have to, right. So I would imagine that would explain why those didn't really go into a distribution, because they didn't meet, well, you said there weren't enough labs, so.
Cannabis testing laboratories are the only type of cannabis business that is prohibited from having any ownership interest in any other cannabis business. You can be vertically integrated to where, as a retailer, you can also own or part own cultivation, manufacturing. You can have that whole supply chain, have a foothold in different steps of it. But testing laboratories serve basically a semi-regulatory function. And so because of that, they're not allowed to have any interest in the product that moves through their hands for testing purposes. And that might be one of the things that limits the interest in starting them. Plus, there's also a very high equipment investment in the tooling and equipment and all of those needs, and a lot of regulations that they have to follow. So that is something that any community that gets to that, again, that kind of critical mass of having enough, the aspects of the industry that they can, might be home to a testing laboratory. It's, something that helps to secure the business within a certain area, at least on a regional basis.
Mm-hmm. And I remember the lab that, I don't know if all of us visited, but I think they basically said the grower doesn't want to give up a bunch of stuff to be examined by the lab. Mm-hmm. And so it's I don't know what that means. They may have to have a certain amount to be able to have testing, but they don't want to just take it out of circulation, and they want to, people who growers or cultivators want that back right away. And I just found, I found that, and it makes sense, because we need regulations for a lot of different products, and that certainly makes sense.
Well, the the sample that's tested by the laboratories has to be destroyed afterwards, so it doesn't go back to them. But it is only very small.
That's probably
Yeah.
why they're stingy with the sample, I would imagine.
Yeah, there's and the sample size and the batch size that it has to be taken from, all of that is defined in law. So if they want to be able to sell product legally, they have to be willing to part with that. By our analysis that we've done, the cost of the testing and the small loss of product, it's about 0.5% of the product that they lose for sampling, works out to about the equivalent of combined about the equivalent of another 1% tax.
I see.
One other quick question.
Yes.
Because since you're here, I'm going to utilize the time. What are you finding? I've done a lot of work up in Humboldt myself in the dairy industry.
We do have cows too.
Pardon me?
We do have
I
cows
know,
too, in
I know,
addition to
yeah.
cannabis, we do have cows.
So what are you finding in areas around the state that you may have worked in concerning water issues? So in other words, if somebody comes in and wants to do a 10,000 square foot place, I mean, we have situations here where people want to build hotels or housing or things like that. And a lot of times people come up with, well, water is a big issue. Are you finding that in any other areas?
Water tends to be really only a significant issue where you have a lot of outdoor cultivation. And one of the things that has created a lot of concerns about it is in places like in Humboldt and Mendocino and Trinity in particular, where there's a long history of it. The reason we had that long history wasn't, and I know this is anathema to the Humboldt industry, but it wasn't because it's the best place in the world to grow it. It's because you could hide there.
Yep.
And so we had a lot of cultivation that was happening in places that it never should happen, up in the upper watersheds where there isn't a lot of water, and where diverting water to farms is taking away from fish, or that if that water does return into the streams, it may contain a lot of herbicides or pesticides or other kinds of residues. And so that's where a lot of those water issues come from. When you have indoor cultivation, the water usage is probably not going to be excessive from other similar types of light industrial uses.
Thank you.
I don't want to belabor this. I have a great question for you, but I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to belabor this. Is there anything else that comments or questions? None. Okay. So our charge this evening is go all the way back to the beginning. I think to accept the report.
Yes, the action for the recommended action from council is to hear and accept the report.
I'm sorry, to accept.
Hear and accept the report, and then we will have an additional staff item.
So what is the pleasure of the city council?
Move to accept the report.
Second.
And roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion
Thank you.
carries 4-0 with the Vice Mayor Harrington absent.
Just as a consultant step down, I'd just like to thank them. This was a
thank
very
you.
thorough report in 30 days, and so thank them for their work.
Thank you. Thank you. What? Oh, sure. We're going to take a 5-minute break. reopen the council meeting. And now we'll be looking at 3.2.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. So this is an item to talk now about the next actions to look at the petition initiative, and I will turn this over to our city attorney, Mr. Walter.
Thank you, Kathy. The Elections Code now provides that the council has 3 options. These are the same options the council had a month ago, except you also had the additional option a month ago to order the report, which you did. And the Elections Code now says that you get to go back and look at the 3 options you had available to you a month ago. And the options are, 1, you can adopt the initiative measure as your own ordinance tonight or within 10 days. 2, you can call an election at a regularly scheduled municipal election, which in the city of Sonoma means in November 2020, or you can call and order a special election on the initiative, which must occur within 88 to 103 days. We've been informed by the county elections officials that they would conduct such an election. The date, we don't know specifically when the county would be available to do that, but as I said before, it has to be a minimum of 88 days from tonight, but no more than 103. And if you want to inquire a bit more about the special election and its cost, etc., I'll defer to Rebecca to answer those questions. But those are the 3 options you have. Before you tonight is a resolution that calls for the election to occur in November 2020. And if that is your desire, then that resolution would need to be adopted by 3 votes tonight. Any questions that I might be able to answer for you?
Are there any questions? None?
What would be the cost of a special election?
Well, as I confirmed that with the county this afternoon, and it would have to be a actual live polling place. It would be a special election standalone, or not standalone, actually it would be standalone, but the county would run it. It would only be our measure. And it would be a range between $38,825 and $70,590.
I'm sorry, could you say the numbers again? I apologize.
It's a range. It's $38,825 to $70,590.
Thank you. I'm sorry, yeah.
And the opportunity for a competing measure could happen in this time as well. In other words, if somebody comes up with another...
that would not be likely if you set it for a special election between 88 and 103
No, I'm talking
days.
about if it was the 2020.
Yes. I mean, the council could put its own measure on the ballot at that time, or another party could circulate a petition and have it also on the ballot.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? None? I'd like to take this out to the public.
I just have something very quick to say, and I know you can't decide this right now. Josette Brosiker, 1110 Loma Court. But, I mean, I know this is not one of the 3 things, but you know that you can let this thing go to 2020. You can go back, craft your own ordinance that works for everybody in the city, and then this thing will go on in 2020 and it'll fail. And that's what I think you should do.
Thank you. Are there any others who would like to speak? Seeing none, I will close the public session. Are there any comments from our city council?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. I think this has been a hard process for a lot of people in our community, including my family, and I want to apologize to my family for what they've had to go through. And it was a death threat to the IT, who made the last one sound like it wasn't that bad. There's a lot of bad things happening right now in Sonoma to a lot of city council members. I've been on the city council for 6 years, and I'm outraged. I've talked to some candidates that are running for council, and they all agree. Sonoma is better than that. So with that said, for public to know, because there's a lot of things going on in social media, a lot of things going out there in different directions. This did not come to the council in time for me to react. This 30-day study that we had, that we just heard, was an important process of our democracy. To have the local Democratic Party send out a resolution stating that 2 of the members of the city council should change their vote is bullying. The same thing that they are doing to council members, what they're doing to candidates, the local Democratic Party is doing the same. I want a public apology from the local Democratic Party, because I'm a Democrat, and I'm a proud Democrat, and I am not for what the Democrat resolution had sent over to me. If I have to sit up here and do my job at a local level, and like what past Mayor Ken Brown said tonight, is so true. It's just so true. It's about local control. It's about abiding by the law. This city council did not do anything wrong. The only thing that we did wrong in a small percentage of this society is they didn't like the vote. And they're going to bully. I'm going to be on this council for 2 more years, and then I will not be running for re-election. And that's not because of the threats to myself and my family. It's more or less what I always intended to do. But I hope that this does not deter other candidates, good candidates, for seeking re-election if they're incumbents, or if they come, from our residents. So I'm going to be supporting the resolution tonight for the 2020. But for the record, the reason I voted the way I voted is because of the timeline. It came in too late. And that's it. That's what social media should be talking about. They shouldn't be talking about all this other stuff. So I'll let my colleagues speak, and then I can read the resolution, or one of them may.
Anybody else? Would anyone else like to speak?
Well, I'm not a Democrat, and I'm not a Republican. I'm pretty upset about all the things that have gone on, including the latest things that have come towards council. And I don't bother with social media. Maybe that's a detriment to my being, I don't know, but my goal is to spend time with my kids, and that's the reason I'm not running for city council, because my kids and my family are my #1 priority. But my community is my priority as well, and I'm not going away. I'm just going to be here doing other things and continue my work with the Rotary Club and the community center and all the other things that I get involved with, and maybe I'll be back at the school board or something like that at some point, and maybe back up here someday. But my #1 priority are my kids. The industry, I think we've gotten more information in the last 30 days than we had before. I think it's better information. When you talk about market studies and things like that, my business is agriculture. And, I can see the cliff that's coming for the cannabis industry, and I can also see the industry that is hidden away in other counties where, why let the government get involved? Why pay taxes? It's a whole another economy up there. My father, who's been gone for about 15 years, was in Ukiah, and the business was booming back, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and the whole community was pretty much a cash community. And I don't have any issues with what people do in their own time, in their own houses or anything else, but I think the medical side, back when I was on the Planning Commission, we talked about we went through this process about boundaries and everything else, and I talked about having organic cannabis and all of those other issues, but I also thought about, with the hospital always coming back to the community for more money and more money, I would love to see that the medicinal cannabis be completely available at our hospital pharmacy. I think it would be awesome. It would bring revenue for that community. for the hospital and help sustain that environment. So I'm going to go with number 2 because I think we have to do that, and I hope to be a part of the conversation in the community later about how to maybe write an alternative for a ballot measure. So I'll be going with number 2. Thanks.
So the report that we just heard confirmed that this initiative has a lot of problems, which is something we suspected before, but it was very helpful to hear about it in more detail. And while the information I do find useful, the report could have been ordered in conjunction with placing this on the upcoming November 2018 ballot. And I believe that no matter how poorly an initiative is written, it has to go to the ballot one way or the other. And in the vacuum created by lack of city council action on an issue, I think it opens a door for initiatives that are born out of very particular interests and not overall what is best for the community. And so a few notes related to the report that they underscore that there's so many different factors that we need to balance and address, and that's why I think that the city is in the best position to make these decisions, and it's something that we can adjust as is necessary. But ultimately, I think it's up to the voters to make this choice. They are the ones that elect us. I think they are the ones to decide even a bad initiative when it is turned in and qualified in time for the election. And if information would be helpful, which I think it has, I think it should have been done at the same time. And so now I feel like the council is in a position where I don't find any of the choices to be acceptable, and I don't think that we should be in this position. And so that's why I'll be abstaining from voting tonight. But I did want to make one more note that I agree that having a productive and healthy dialogue about issues that we don't agree on is essential for our process. I think this is a room where we can come and we can disagree about things, but acknowledge that at the end of the day, the process decides what the decision will be. And that is why I respect my colleagues for the decision they made, but I will not be voting tonight.
Well, I really appreciate the comments. It's kind of interesting. I think it's almost like I have to echo what our council member Cook said, because it's kind of interesting. I feel that there was a meeting, I think we were talking about that, where I haven't even read it. This is how I handle things. I'm ignoring it because I don't think it's important to me. But it's sort of sad that I think the group may have been co-opted by the cannabis industry, because it was led by the attorney for the cannabis industry, which I think, and if I'm wrong, that's great. You can tell me I'm wrong and I've lost my mind. But I will just say that if it's true, those are not the Democrats I grew up with. These are not the Democrats of the famous Democrats I worked for. And these are not the Democrats I've met here in Sonoma County. So, I'm going to vote the way I am. I've explained my position, and I'm just going to move forward from there. There are certain things I care about, and being honest and true to myself as I represent people. And if people don't agree with me, I'm sorry for that. But I know there are 10 or 12 other things we're going to agree on, and I hope we can move forward from that. And so that's why I will also be supporting number 2. So I think there's a resolution here. Is that right?
Yeah, and I had one question, I guess, to legal. We have one abstention. What does happen to an agenda item? I mean, we have 3 options, you say, but what would happen if there was another abstention
That's a good question. So if there were only 2 of you voting,
Yes.
then depending on your rules, there are some rules that say abstentions are counted in support of the majority vote. But here there wouldn't be a majority vote. It'd be very difficult if only 2 were voting. It would fail probably.
And what is the consequences to that?
Another interesting question. The proponents of the initiative could then petition for the Superior Court for what's called a writ of mandate that would mandate the council to make a decision.
Well, I will go ahead and make a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma, California, calling for the holding of a general municipal election on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020, for the submission of a proposed ordinance.
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Hunley?
I abstain.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Motion carries 3-1. 3-0-1. Sorry.
That's it. We're done. Hallelujah. Okay, for us. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we are going to be, this is it. We're adjourning. Thank you all. I'm sure there are other things you could have done this evening, so we appreciate your being here.